Program Coordinator for VAYLA, and welcome to our third Sinews in the Cypress event. Before I introduce our series, I do want to mention that this month we are celebrating Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and I want to take a moment to mention our petition for data inclusion. It's called Other Is Not My Identity, and if you haven't had a chance to sign it, I will put the link in the chat box in just a moment. But the Sinews in the Cypress is a speaker series from our Earth Rising program, which we kicked off earlier in this year during the pandemic. And through this program, we aim to educate, empower, and perform outreach with community members, such as our speaker today, on environmental and environmental justice issues. We also look to collaborate with our community and other intersectional organizations like ours to create lasting change in New Orleans and the Gulf South. And to do this, we want to highlight community members of color who do essential work in environmental preservation and sustainability that often go unnoticed. We're expanding language access and bringing a more intersectional approach to the field by amplifying important voices at the forefront of the conversation. And it's our goal to hope to inspire young leaders in environmental policy and advocacy for our community and the larger world moving forward. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce our Earth Rising Program Coordinator, Zachary Lang, who will be moderating for this event.
Hey, hope everyone is doing well and has been staying dry over the last couple of days. As Ellen said, my name is Zachary Lang. I am the Earth Rising Coordinator here at VAYLA. And before we start, I just wanted to go over a little bit about the name Sinews in the Cypress. So the name Sinews in the Cypress speaks to the deep ties that us Louisianans have to our environment, and more specifically the wetlands. The bald cypress is the state tree of Louisiana. It's a staple of the most prevalent ecosystem in our state and is one of the most ubiquitous and broadcasted species found throughout Louisiana. In the environmental world, the tree is an ambassador for the wetlands and the state. The bald cypress is also extremely resilient, much like the population of Louisiana, and is resistant to decay, which has led to its nickname, the wood eternal. The term sinews has two connected yet different meanings. First, it is used to describe a piece of tough, fibrous tissue, uniting tissue to bone, as well as bone to bone. The other definition for a sinew is the part of a structure or system that gives it strength and binds it together. The term sinew gives a humanistic vision to the project, as well as a show of strength and resilience that the people, as well as the Louisiana environment, display. Lastly, when the bald cypress grows in the swamp, it develops a unique texture that is often described as sinewy, resembling tendons on a person. Throughout the year, we'll be holding these guest speaker events. We'll be bringing experts from across the environmental and environmental justice field to host discussions. We plan on discussing everything from environmental racism to Black, Indigenous, people of color's connection to water and the environment, to carbon emission reduction strategies for our city. We plan on keeping the event's attendance capped to create a more intimate atmosphere and foster an environment for open discussion. For the speaker series, we're going to be using the following format. We're going to initially turn it over to our guest speaker, who our speakers will give a brief presentation. Then we're going to have pre-arranged questions that we're going to ask the presenters. And at the end, we're going to open up the floor and take questions from the audience. If you would like to ask a question, just put it into the chat, and either Ellen or I will read it out loud to our presenters. I'm very excited to introduce our speakers for this event, Cyndhia Ramatchandirane and Jacqueline Tan. Cyndhia is a staff scientist for Earth Justice, an environmental law firm. She has a deep understanding of coastal restoration and the effects that oil and gas have on our environment communities. Jacqueline is a trauma-informed social worker by training with a focus on global health administration and policy. Today, we'll be discussing coastal restoration and oil and gas's impact on us on an individual and community level, as well as exploring ways to promote inclusivity and community involvement in the field. And we're also going to be focusing a lot on the MidBaritaria Sediment project. And without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it on to Cyndhia.
Hi there, and thank you so much for inviting me. If you can give me just 1 second as I share my screen. Where did my presentation go? This is always what happens right in the moment of, there we go. Hi. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was unmuted. I apologize. Okay, how do I?
So, yeah, you got the little button on the top. Yep.
Okay, so now you can see the actual presentation, not the notes, the presenter slides. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I first wanted to acknowledge that I hijacked some slides from my coworker, Michael Brown, who's a staff attorney at Earth Justice, and he's working on the Plaquemines Liquids Terminal project, which I will talk about later on in the presentation. So I want to make sure he was acknowledged. This here is a beautiful satellite imagery of the Delta, the Louisiana Delta. And the reason I chose this is to highlight just how much sediment is being delivered from the Mississippi River. You can see all this like chocolate brown stuff coming out of the Bird's Foot Delta, and it's basically being dumped out in the Gulf. And it's a shame because what the Mississippi River has historically done is build the coast of Louisiana. And when European settlers arrived and built levees, we prevented the river from being able to deliver that sediment to the marshes or the floodplain. And these poor marshes are trying very hard to keep up with sea level rise, with storm impacts, with getting cut up from oil and gas canals and subsidence, which is basically the land sinking. So these poor marshes are trying to win a losing battle without the source of nourishment that they need from the river, which is all this amazing chocolate brown sediment that you're seeing is being dumped out on the coast. And you'll see why I bring this up in just a minute. This is a map of the Asian population based on the 2014-2018 American Census Survey. I used the EPA EJ screen to grab this data. I encourage you all to go check it out and click around and explore. The reason I brought this up is I know that VAYLA ran a rigorous campaign to get everybody registered in the 2020 census, and especially highlighting the importance of API community to be recorded in the census. So I point this out to show, well, obviously you can see that there's a higher density population around the greater New Orleans area, but you can see a few blue dots out in the coastal area as well, just to highlight that the API community is present in the coastal area, and that's very important. That matters for massive projects for coastal restoration, industry, infrastructure, that our voices are heard. So what's the problem? The problem is we've lost a lot of land. This is a map created by the USGS, the US Geological Survey. They used a series of historical documents, maps, and satellite imagery to figure out how much land has been lost roughly over the last century, actually in less than 100 years. So the reddish to bluish colors are land loss, and the greenish to brown colors are land gain. Now, one tricky thing is that they chose to make the boundary of this map in yellow, which is land gain, but it's actually the boundary. So don't count the yellow that you see there. But you can see that basically we've lost a lot more land than we've gained. We've gained a tiny little bit around the Atchafalaya and Wax Lake Delta, kind of in the middle of that map there, and at the very edge of the Bird's Foot Delta. But overall, we've lost over 2,000 square miles, I think. That's roughly the size of the state of Delaware, or roughly half of the big island of Hawaii, which is huge. Now, what is projected to being lost in the future. So using a series of assumptions and kind of the best available science and the latest projections for climate change, this is like one possible scenario of how much land will continue to be lost over the next 50 years if we do nothing. Obviously, red being land loss and green being land gain. So this is a very large amount. Now, keep in mind, these are numerical modeling results, so they give a best guess, but they're not like acre by acre accurate, but it gives you a general order of magnitude for how much land might be lost. This is the increased flood risk over the next 50 years if we don't do anything to protect the coast. As you can see, we have a tremendous amount of flood risk from mostly storm surge as well as from sea level rise if we don't do anything to protect the coast or have any kind of restoration efforts. I'll point your eye towards the New Orleans area. You'll notice that the New Orleans area is gray and that there's kind of a sharp boundary between New Orleans and a little bit south of New Orleans. And that is because the greater New Orleans area and a little bit south of there is protected by the flood protection system. And everybody inside is more or less protected from storm surge. You may have seen your alerts on your phone. Oh, we're closing. That happened like maybe once a couple of years ago. We're closing the flood protection barriers, and that's what that is basically. And anybody who has property or who lives outside of that system is very vulnerable and at very high risk of being hurt or have their property damaged. I wanted to highlight just what we stand to lose. So what has the state been doing to mitigate some of these efforts, the land loss and the flood risk? This is the Coastal Master Plan. It's a massive $50 billion restoration plan, protection and restoration plan put forth by the state. And it includes a conglomeration of different types of projects that target slightly different things. So you'll notice on the bottom left, the different project types that are being proposed. They're color coded. So one is, for example, structural, that's the pink, and that would be like reinforcing levees and things like that. Non-structural would be things like elevating homes, shoreline protection and barrier island restoration. You'll notice kind of the orange dots right by Baritaria, by the river. That's to help reinforce those barrier islands. They're kind of the front line of defense against storms. So after you pass the barrier islands, if you lose those marshes become very vulnerable to storms and to wave impact. And you'll see the marsh creation in green kind of scattered throughout the coast. And then the big flagship projects, which sounds like several of you know about already, is the sediment diversions. There, you'll notice, sorry, this map is very small, but you can go to the Coastal Master Plan website and you can use the map viewer, data viewer to look at these more closely. So those are kind of scattered along the river. And the idea behind sediment diversions is to put an opening in the levee to allow the river to deliver sediment to these marshes when there's a high amount of sediment in the river. And it's to kind of help reconnect the river to the floodplain and give marshes their source of sediment to keep up with sea level rise. So we'll zoom into the southeast on the delta, and then even further, we'll zoom into the MidBaritaria sediment diversion right here. So this is being proposed near the community of Ironton and Myrtle Grove. Ironton is a mostly Black community. They are the descendants of formerly emancipated slaves. And Myrtle Grove is a relatively white, wealthier community. Both of those communities, I believe, are opposed to the MidBaritaria sediment diversion project because they are very worried that they will feel the impact of back flooding and some other issues, that it will change, for example, the fish and shrimp that they catch, because it will bring a lot of sediment nutrients, but also fresh water. So it would change the salinity of the area. And then the oil and gas industry decided to propose an oil and gas export terminal right next to the proposed MidBaritaria sediment diversion site. Now, why would that be? An oil and gas terminal would basically increase your greenhouse gas emissions and presents a tremendous amount of risk to the coastal diversion project being proposed here. So this is a preliminary plan of about 30-ish or just under 30 tanks of huge amounts of oil, and I forget the amount of oil off the top of my head right now, that would be stored right next to the diversion. And you'll see on the river, there's a proposed barge and dock that would be basically putting the oil onto these barges to be exported. So what does the Plaquemines Liquids Terminal need? It needs a number of permits, notably the coastal use permit to be able to use the waters and wetlands. It would be affecting the wetlands in the area. It also needs an air permit because of the huge amount of emissions to the area and to the state. That is currently happening with the LDEQ, the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. This terminal, based on its application, would release a very large amount of toxic air pollutants and criteria air pollutants. And I can direct you to the website to learn more about those. But basically, those have a tremendous impact for public health, whether it's for respiratory issues, neurological, or reproductive, and so on. There's a very large amount of greenhouse gas emissions. According to the application, they would release over 500,000 tons of greenhouse gases per year. And then I did a rough calculation using the oil climate index. And if you count the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from extractions, so from like the Bakken or something, all the way to when it is exported and delivered to the customer, it would be over 300 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year. That is enormous. It is roughly equivalent to 200 petroleum refineries. The proposed oil terminal site is also on the covers a few enslaved persons burial sites. There's also a risk to the efficiency of the sediment diversion. So basically, by having the barge and dock right there, it would actually prevent the full power of being able to use the diversion, and it would deliver less sediment than intended, which would defeat the purpose of the diversion at all. And there's a tremendous risk of oil spills. Any oil spilled in the area would then affect the very marshes that we're trying to protect by having this coastal restoration project. So here's an image you see in the red, the purple circles are the tanks that I showed you earlier. And then the red boxes are where they did a survey and found the burial sites. So what can we do about this? I think we might get to this in the questions. I think it's very important for the communities to be involved in the permitting process for any and all projects. Whether it's the coastal restoration, sediment diversion, any kind of infrastructure from oil and gas or any other industry. So here, I think I sent Zach the information to this earlier in the week, so he can certainly pass this information along, but you can participate in learning more about how to be engaged, how to learn about what projects are coming down the pipe, and how to make public comments, and learn more about your rights to clean air and clean water. So with that, I'll take any questions. I know that was really fast, and I'm happy to answer more questions.
All right, thank you so much, Cyndhia. That was fantastic, and I'll drop. I have to go get to it, but I will drop the links that you sent me because it sounds very interesting, and I definitely would highly recommend if everyone has the time to go attend those meetings, because public participation is so important in the process. So I was gonna start to ask some questions to get the ball rolling, but if people have any questions that they're thinking, don't be worried, and you can put them in the chat, and me and Ellen will get them to our presenter. But the first question that I had, now that we sort of got this baseline knowledge on the Coastal Master Plan and the big project that it proposes of the MidBaritaria sediment diversion, and I'll I'm gonna put this question out to both of our speakers, but maybe Cyndhia, you could go first. Do you feel that the current solutions put out by the Coastal Master Plan adequately address the issues that are affecting communities, especially BIPOC and AAPI communities? And where do you think the gaps lie in the current plan?
So if you go to the website and look at the Coastal Master Plan document, you'll see they have a section on public engagement and outreach. And so they did run, workshops and public meetings where they presented what the Coastal Master Plan projects were. There was a public commenting period. That being said, I think that's like the minimum that they could do. And personally, I think that they could have done more. I know that a lot of investment is in the science and engineering aspect of the plan, which is important. By all means, it's very important to get the science and engineering part right, of course. But I think it's also super important to engage the community to hear not just their concerns about these projects, like flooding, for example, right? That's a legitimate concern. You're going to be shooting a ton of water from the river into the basin at high river flow. Of course, you're going to be worried about whether it's going to flood your home or areas that you care about, maybe your access to the grocery store or the doctor, right? So I think it's, and so expressing your concerns, that's one, but also to hear from the communities what solutions they would want. And that should be a part of, and that should inform rather the science and engineering work, rather than doing the science and engineering and then going to the communities and being like, here's what we suggest. There should be a little bit more of a back and forth. And I don't think that has been done yet. But there is a recognition starting to in the last few years that that they need to do that.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Cyndhia. And then I'm going to pass it to our executive director, the executive director of VAYLA, Jacqueline Tan. So Jackie, what are your thoughts on this? I can also reiterate the question if you'd like.
You can reiterate it. I have so many thoughts right now because I was like really, it was the first time I heard Cyndhia's presentation, and I was absorbing so much of it from all the different task force that folks throw us on for the Asian American Heritage Month. So I was trying to compile and integrate. So yeah, let's just ask.
Yeah. So the question was, do you feel the current solutions, that the ones that Cyndhia talked upon, put out by the Coastal Master Plan, adequately address the issues that are affecting communities, especially BIPOC and AAPI communities? And then where do you think the gap lies in the current plan? What solutions do you think need to be added to address that?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to piggyback off a little bit of Cyndhia's answer, and I think in short, what I got from it is not all engagement is equal, right? Not all engagement is effective. And when I hear folks tell me about the Asian American Pacific Islander community, especially when they're coming from outside of it, they love using the word resilience. Our community is resilient, so we should do this. We propose this because your community is so resilient. And I feel like it plays right into the model minority myth. But I feel like what they really mean by the word resilience is disassociated, right? I think the science is essential, but the stories and days of our lives when we're living the science is crucial when we talk about sea levels rising. There are real lives and consequences that affect people and communities that simply don't have the time to slow down from the myriad of systemic violence and harm, and bear the brunt of these climate burdens that we don't have the time to slow down and process and really think about. Hey, like, why are there, so many insect species of this sort? Why are there all these like little minutia of changes in my daily life that affect me, that come from all of these changes that are made in large part by all these decisions that are being made without us in the conversation, right? And I think this is where we have to encourage leadership, where we connect young people to their own power and potential. Because the story of oil and gas, as well as coastal restoration, is one where Asian American as activists are often left out. There's this disconnect, I think, especially when we think about the genesis of VAYLA and how it really came about because of young people who decided they wanted to be and had to be a part of equitable recovery efforts in this fight, right? there has to be this shift in what we feel like we're allowed to be a part of. So the question oftentimes is placed on us, and that onus that, you know, like, well, why aren't Asian Americans involved? Well, I think on a collective community and policy level, right, from the Chinese and Filipino sailors and fishermen and laborers that were located in Baritaria Bay in the 1870s to the Vietnamese and Cambodian shrimpers and fishermen that are all around this great state today, we have a whole class of our diaspora and community that's often monolingual, limited in English proficiency, that is ridden with like neocolonial trauma, and lacks the mobility to really invest in anything beyond their livelihood and survival. And so as we encourage first and second generation Asian American leadership to become allies to Black and Indigenous folks that have been fighting this fight of liberation on so many different fronts, I think it's really essential to cast a space of critical connection outside of just what our nonprofit does, right? Like how do we encourage the investment of these folks that are talking about coastal restoration and a plan and federal dollars and, you know, state dollars, and how are we engendering an actual cultural shift to ask the right questions? Because the question really, again, I'm going to emphasize, is never how can Asian American leaders be a part of the change, but if we are really allowed to. And if we're going to sit at these tables that are already built, are they tables that were built with us in mind, or are they just tables, you know, where they, you know, like, I feel like being a part of the conversation and representation for representation's sake for all of these task force and a lot of these issues that we face as a community are kind of null and void if we're not going to actually think about how we sustainably create leadership and the next generation in a way where it allows for mobility. It allows for like conversation that critically thinks about what violence and what harm is done if we don't involve Asian American Pacific Islander voices, right? And so, no, I don't think, I think in short, in that whole tangent, I don't think enough is being done. And I feel like the bar is very low, and it's really up to us to keep pushing that bar from below 6 feet underground, you know, and rise with the sea levels. If that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. I thought that was great. It's definitely like the access to the information, and there's just still so much left that needs to be done to have the inclusivity that we're looking for in the field. I was going on to the next one. I was just thinking maybe I'll start off with Jacqueline for this one. So what role do you think intersectionality plays when discussing the oil and gas industry and the people that it most affects? What effects do you feel this has on the communities that are most affected by pollution from oil and gas? So basically, what ways are you thinking intersectionality plays into this?
I feel like we aren't single issue people that live single issue lives. I think it's a very social worker response. But from a public health perspective, right, I think having a praxis for Asian American identity in New Orleans and Louisiana is essential when we can have a space and a foundation where we can identify where acculturation and assimilation delineates from cultural appropriation, when we invest in leadership in a way where we are validating and witnessing the liberation work that has already been done and continues to be done, right? There are folks who have to fight on the front lines, right? We've done that for a little bit with the No Gas Plan campaigns, and folks who have to sit back and really strategize and think about how we can connect to the source of our issues to really embody healing and serve the community in that way. And I think from our organizational standpoint, again, not all engagement is equal and not all engagement is effective, and you cannot moneyball your way through our community. You simply can't, right? It's about time, it's messy work, it's conversations that challenge oftentimes our own community members who don't vote or vote against their best interest because of, you know, misconceptions and their own fears and their own trauma. So what we work through is not just deflecting the white gaze when we're doing environmental justice work, but really internal healing work for our own community. Like, how do we not only train up and uplift and amplify young people as leaders and experts of their own experiences with intersectionality, but how are we equipping them and exposing them to conversations like this with scientists and folks that they would otherwise not get conversations with, so that they can be their own ambassadors in their own family, right? Asian Americans are most likely to live in multi-generational households, right? And those conversations around the table are sometimes the most challenging, intimate, and vulnerable conversations we can have for change. So I feel like intersectionality happens in the home. And anytime I talk to like a cishet man, I say the same thing. You want to change the world, don't go posting on Twitter. Go treat the women in your, in your immediate world like correctly and kindly, relentlessly, with compassion, because it really begins with how we interface on a day-to-day. We can't just wake up and say, hey, I'm about environmental justice, or I've decided that I'm not racist. It's this daily kind of choice of being intersectional and really seeing that our liberations are bound together. Asian Americans may not be as affected as, Black and brown folks in this area, or have not been traditionally, loud and vocal about certain issues. And that's time to, I think, really build what shared solidarity and responsibility can look like. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for communities of color to come together.
All right, thank you so much for that, Jacqueline. I was wondering if I could maybe pass on over to Cyndhia. Do you have something to add on?
Yeah, sure. Jacqueline, I thought that was really insightful and so important. Is to expose more BIPOC communities and encourage them to pursue those fields. And maybe organizations like VAYLA can kind of create those connections and introduce people to those fields and say, hey, listen, this is a space where we need more people like you with your perspective, because your perspective is unique. It's not going to be the same as the Cajun fisherman over there, or as somebody from New Orleans. So I think that's really important to make. I think local universities are probably a really great space to engage, and of course K through 12. But universities are really, I feel like, where people really jump from undergrad, a bachelor's degree and then a job. And that would be a great, and it doesn't have to be techie, right? Like, we still need great program managers and project managers and finance people. And, we need all kinds of jobs, not just somebody sitting behind a computer. I'm an Indian woman, and I was driving a giant Super Duty truck with braids. I had longer hair at the time, with braids, and a giant 20-25 foot trailering a 20-25 foot boat out in Cajun country, collecting data and backing up this truck and boat at the boat launch. And I was like, I don't think I've seen anybody who looks like me do this, and I feel really weird doing it, but now I know how to do it. But it would be great to see more of that, and more people engage in these things and know that it's doable, that it is doable.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cyndhia. I think, you made a great point when you were talking just about that we aren't going to fully understand these issues if we don't have inclusivity, like, from everybody. We need everyone's perspective to get the real picture of what's going on. I think that's so important when discussing all types of issues, but also just especially environmental justice issues and just environmental issues in general. Next, so just before I ask another question, if anyone in the audience has any questions, they're more than welcome to type them in the chat. Just because we're getting up to the last 10 minutes or so I'd love if we could get some participation. So if you put it in the chat, either Ellen or I will read them to our guest speakers. But for right now, I was hoping maybe to jump to a question, maybe a little bit more just about I guess more thought into the Sediment project. So I know recently Plaquemines and St. Bernard Parish local government voted down the MidBaritaria Sediment project, but I think it was Plaquemines approved the oil and gas terminal on the local level that was proposed to be right next to the coastal restoration project. So why do you think the local government chose to continue to invest in oil and gas and not coastal restoration? And how does that impact and affect the communities who work in those industries? I guess I'll pass this one first to Cyndhia, and then maybe we can get to Jackie.
One word answer to the first about why: money. Simply money. I don't remember. I think you can find some older articles from like 2020 or 2019 about the oil terminal and a lot of the delays that it faced and some of the controversy and drama with the port of Plaquemines. So I don't remember the exact details, but there were like quite a bit of brouhaha around money and buying the land and what the terminal would provide for the parish and for the port. I don't know exactly how the parish benefits financially from the coastal restoration project. The other thing is that because both CPRA, right, who's in charge of the coastal master plan and this diversion, and the oil terminal, or sorry, oil industry is kind of like who directs that is the governor, the head of state, right? They are both, it's a very funny situation where the one project that would defeat the purpose of the other one, I'm rambling a little bit, but it really does baffle me that this happened. I will say though that these votes by the parish governments are largely symbolic. As far as I know, there's no like legal consequences from their voting the way that they did, but maybe somebody else in the audience knows more about that and can speak about it. And then what was sorry, the second part of the question was?
I can re-ask it. Yeah, so I guess I was just sort of curious because I know one of the big reasons why it was sort of the MidBaritaria sediment project was shot down was due to like some of the ill effects that we're going to have into the fishing industry. When you look at it, also the oil and gas terminal in the long term would have similar effects. So that was where I was going with that one. But the second question, it was just how does the thinking or that these decisions, how do you think that it impacts and affects the communities who work in this area and in these industries?
So that's very complex because on the one hand, you're trying to preserve Baritaria Basin long term, right, for the benefit of future generations so that they can continue fishing there and enjoy recreationally as well as for livelihoods. But at the same time, the immediate effects, a lot of people think are going to be very negative. They believe that, you know, an influx of fresh water into this basin is going to really shift where people can find their fish. They're worried about flooding and things like that. For the oil terminal, they tout that they will get a lot of, or not that many jobs, a few jobs, certainly construction jobs in the short term, and that it could potentially bring money to the state. But the thing is, oil demand has peaked, and hopefully what communities can ask the state is to invest in future industry and in communities, in industry that is more viable for the future, where the economy is going. So for example, why not take advantage of Louisiana's know-how on building oil rigs and focus that on building wind farms or solar or things like that, right? So really the community's voices are very important in informing these massive infrastructure projects. And the link that you posted in the chat about the LDQ and learning about public participation in these permitting processes is so important, because that's one place that communities can really, and individuals can really express their concerns as well as what they want. And I am going to make a plug for VAYLA and say VAYLA can totally spearhead this and learn about how LDQ permitting works and help disseminate that information so that communities can be empowered to have a voice and to participate in the public commenting process.
I have a question if there's time.
Yeah, of course. You can go ask your question.
Thank you so much. This has been really great. Thank you for your time. I'm not 100% up to date, but the last I heard, the coastal master plan isn't fully funded or close to being funded by the state. So it's like, I don't know. I'm like, what are your thoughts on that funding issue? Like back to the money point, and like that most of this project can't happen without that funding. Like what it seems like a lot of talk from the state.
Right. So the full coastal master plan, that map where I showed you all of the different colors of different types of projects, is $50 billion. And no, the state does not have that $50 billion. The MidBaritaria sediment diversion is $2 billion. I am not up to date on the exact details for the funding for the MidBaritaria project. I believe that it is much further along than some of the other ones around the state. I do also know that from the BP oil spill, there's a significant amount of money from the fines from that spill that are being distributed in various restoration efforts, but I don't remember, and I don't know the exact like buckets of money that comes from. But you are absolutely right that the state has not figured out how to come up with the full $50 billion yet. I think they are trying to make, they're beating the drum everywhere that they possibly can, including, well, I think there's some that are trying to partner up with industry a little bit to see if they could help fund the project. But again, I don't know the details, and would have to look it up and get back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Cyndhia. I don't think we should probably get to another question, because I think then we're probably gonna go over the allotted time, and I want to respect everyone's time that signed up with us today. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again to our two guest speakers. Thank you so much, Cyndhia, for coming on, and thank you, Jacqueline, for giving us your time and your insight. I thought the conversation was great and really enlightening on a bunch of different sides of these issues, and just also to see how many different sides there are that we can discuss about them. We will be announcing our next Sinews in the Cypress event soon, so stay tuned. But to celebrate Asian Pacific American History Month, next Monday we are having our AAPI Rising, the Taste of Resilience and Community, on Monday, May 17th at 4:30. So we'd love for everyone who's come to join. You can register via our website or our social media and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on all of the upcoming events. And I think Alan is putting them in the chat. We also want to plug some of the work that Cyndhia is doing as well. I think she's putting in maybe the Ripple Effect, NOLA's website, and Earth Justice. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us for our third Sinews in the Cypress. And I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye.